Thank you, Larry the Liberty Guy. Welcome to another episode of In the Dugout with Mike Stenhouse, and I am Mike Stenhouse, your host. In the Dugout is an informal online video blog, if you would, an interview series where we kind of just replicate conditions of when I used to sit in the dugout before a ball game and before we took batting practice and just chat with our friends and teammates or opposition about whatever. So today, in just a few minutes, you'll be meeting Dr. Michael Farren, a research fellow at the Mercatus Center. I'll tell you more about him in a little while. We're going to talk about corporate welfare, but let me tell you first why we're having this discussion. Before I get to that, just a comment on just how typical the left and the media are in this state. As some of you know, we released a major report yesterday detailing government union spending and how completely one-sided it is when it comes to partisan or which party they donate to do. I mean, we're talking 97, 98%, and basically 100% of their other spending goes to far left extreme social justice type causes. I mean, the far left of the left. So, of course, the unions didn't like that report. And of course, rather than dispute the facts, they attack the messenger, which is us. And their mode of attack is to somehow think that by blaming famous and evil Koch brothers, that we somehow receive funding from the Koch brothers, that somehow that invalidates our report. I mean, I don't know why Koch brothers funding, even if it were true, would be any different from George Soros funding on the left. But what we're talking about here is union spending. And somebody's got to counter this massive and corrupt union spending that's happening on the left, because the unions, government unions, are supporting not only left-wing candidates, primarily in the Democratic, but far left-wing causes, from Planned Parenthood to, right on down the line. They have nothing to do with teachers. The NEA so supports that. The Providence Journal now is taking the bait. Some of these left-wing instigators are putting out all these false rumors about our donors. Of course, we never disclose our donors, and you want to know why, and it's relevant to today's discussion. With all the talk about Black Lives Matter, the Supreme Court ruled decades ago that nonprofits like us do not have to disclose their donors. And here's why. The case was about the NAACP and their donors. And the question was, if they disclosed their donors, the KKK was going to go after their donors. And the Supreme Court says, no, you're a 501c3. You can't be partisan politics. Therefore, you're protected speech, and you do not have to disclose your donors. So understanding why, especially in today's cancel culture, we protect our donors, period. Just like the Supreme Court sought to protect the NAACP. All right, now why we're having Dr. Farren here today. Our center also put out a report. We've commented a lot on the massive budget deficits that our state and many states are facing because of the pandemic shutdown. The unions are using their political money, as we outlined in the report, to argue for tax increases as a way to plug the deficits. Many of the lawmakers are taking the cowardly way out, and they seem to be looking at massive bonds. Let's just create more debt, create more near-term and long-term tax problems and burdens on ourselves and on future generations. Of course, we would advocate for cutting spending to matching the revenues that come in. Don't spend more than what we have. I mean, it's a simple decision that every family and every business goes through, but yet the government never seems to understand that. And one of we think the lowest hanging and easiest pieces of fruit to cut is what we call corporate welfare. So as it turns out, let's bring in Dr. Michael Farren. Dr. Farren recently, we'll talk about that in a second, but Dr. Farren, welcome to In the Dugout.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now you know the routine here. What do you got for me with your team? What cap you got wearing today?
I grew up in Cincinnati until I was 10 years old.
Now that's one of my arch enemies when I played for the Montreal Expos. And that was in the early 80s. And just a very quick story. there's a longer story I'll tell you off air, but one of your great Reds pitchers in the 80s, I hope many of our supporters remember, was a guy named Mario Soto from the Dominican Republic. He had the best changeup ever, I think, in the history of baseball. And I didn't play regularly, but I did face him maybe 3 starts. And probably out of the 8 at bats I had against him, he probably struck me out 5 times with that changeup that I couldn't hit. But I did get a single off him, and I did hit a home run off him on 2 of those other 3 at bats. So it was kind of a do or die with him. But anyway, that's my memory of the Reds. Whenever I think of the Reds, I think of Mario Soto. So welcome in the dugout, Dr. Farren.
Thanks very much. Sounds like you swing for the fences.
Ooh, I like it. I like it. I like it. And yes, we do. We don't play small ball here in Rhode Island. We tackle the big issues, and we think raising taxes on Rhode Islanders while we're all down from health and economic reasons because of the pandemic is a bad idea. I think it's much better if we cut some corporate welfare. So talk to us about the recent report you just put out and why, just in summary, and then we'll get into some detail, why corporate welfare is so bad.
Sure. So I would completely agree. Cutting corporate welfare, subsidies for corporations that don't need it, or just subsidies at all for any favored corporations or interests at all is a bad idea because, one, it twists government authority. And what that does is it makes people disbelieve that government is actually unbiased and that you can actually buy government or that you can somehow sway government to your own ends. And
the old picking winners and losers argument, right?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of economic reasons why that causes harm in terms of when you chase a subsidy, when you lobby for a subsidy or special treatment in general, because regulations are their own version of subsidies. We define a subsidy
yes, they are.
as any portion of favoritism, special treatment, or privilege that government grants to one economic interest that it doesn't grant to every economic interest. So we would argue for a generality clause that what goes for one person has to go for every person in the economy.
And we call that, well, even still, even if it applies to everyone, and I don't want to get off on the regulation side too much, but I just want to complete that thought. You know, and I know that even a regulation that is designed for everyone, but that only a special few can meet, that's called protectionism. And many regulations out there, if they're not getting a cash handout from the government, they're getting a law that protects their business because they know only this special group of people can meet those regulatory standards. Isn't that correct as well?
That's absolutely correct. We did a lot of work on regulatory capture and how regulations can actually turn to serve the regulated interests rather than serve the public interest. And our current research is more along in these areas looking at economic development now, specific subsidies that help one company or one industry,
right,
and that often other businesses end up paying higher taxes for, or their workers end up paying higher taxes for. And so our research that was just released on an Interstate Compact as a solution to
Let's get to that at the end, okay?
Okay.
Let's get to that. We'll save that, the solution, for the end. But, they often call this, and I don't accept the name, they call these kinds of government handouts crony capitalism, right? Now, I don't think there's anything capitalistic about it at all. Capitalistic is a free market. When the government gets involved, that's not a free market. So, we use the term corporate welfare, crony corporatism, or even crony socialism, because it's almost akin, because isn't it true that once an industry or a business or a corporation gets a corporate handout, they're basically owned by the government now because they want to get that subsidy every year now.
Absolutely. My colleague, Matt Mitchell, has a good phrase for that. He says, with government shekels come government shackles. That once you take the money, then you have to keep doing what policymakers want. And so that actually creates its own economic distortion, because if the policymakers say, well, we want you to support this particular means of doing business, we want you to use more workers because that's going to result in more jobs, and our voters want us to drum up more jobs, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily the best thing for the local economy.
So, and this is the issue we run into in Rhode Island all the time. I mean, it is the most frustrating part of my job. We try to advance free market policies all the time. And we talk privately to business leaders, to association heads, Rhode Island, for instance, Rhode Island Manufacturers Association.
Yeah.
And they talk to me and say, God, we got to end all these taxes. We got to end all these regulations. We're 50th in the state in business climate, which we are. And of course, that's due to taxes and regulation. We've got to do something about it. I said, oh, great. Would you join us? Would you sign? Oh, no, we can't say anything. We're getting a subsidy. Our manufacturers or our members are getting, I can't put that at risk. My first responsibility is to my members. And I'm saying, wait a minute. The way you can help your members to get rid of all this insider politics that goes on. So the fear of recrimination, the fear of loss of a few dollars is such a powerful and corrupting element, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the thing is I'm actually a little bit surprised to hear that there's so much resistance against subsidies at the business level, because generally only the most powerful and influential businesses actually receive subsidies. The vast
in Rhode Island, everybody's compromised. Yeah. Everybody.
Interesting. Okay.
And they're not against the subsidies. They're against the taxes and the regulations, but they're happy to take their subsidies. I mean, almost every major employer is here, has one of these corporate deals, CBS and, some of the banks and a lot of companies that are here. We just funded a major, new development downtown that we bribe them to come here. Well, let's say it's a bribe, isn't it? When we hand out to come here?
I don't know. So yes, I agree that it fits the basic definition of a bribe, but if you're bribing someone to do something that they would have done anyway, does it still count as a bribe, or is it just stupid?
Well, you're right that every 8 subsidies, only 1 out of every 8 government subsidies influences a company's decision about where to go. So your argument is they would have come there in the first place. They're just looking to make their little decision a little sweeter. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And that's not just based on my research. That's based on a reading of the entire body of economic development research, of the academic economic development research by one of the godfathers of economic development research, Tim Bartik. And he says only about 12.5% of subsidies actually change where a company is going to locate. So the other 7 out of 8 times, it doesn't matter. You're just literally handing money away for no benefit to the local government or the local community.
So I'm gonna push back just gently and in fun with you a little. I still think it's a bribe. Okay. Maybe the bribe wasn't necessary.
Sure.
But it's still a bribe. It's still an attempted bribe, right? So whether you're arguing it's not even necessary. All right. Now take Rhode Island. I mean, we had what? I mean, maybe it was 2 years ago. I mean, I was laughing, but the media and everybody else thought it was so great. Our governor made a play to get one of Amazon's big regional warehouses in Rhode Island. Mm-hmm. And we're like, listen, not only is this silly to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars in incentive, but how can little Rhode Island compete with Massachusetts or Pennsylvania, somebody who's 7, 8, 10, 20 times bigger than us? How can a little state like Rhode Island possibly compete on that playing field, even if we decided to compete? I mean, isn't it silly for a state like ours to think that way?
It's absolutely silly. And the broad academic literature says that it's not worth it. It's not useful to try to compete because it doesn't change where businesses locate. Businesses are going to locate based on where talent is available. They're going to based on logistics.
Which means education, right? Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, yeah, educated workforce, but not just that, just a properly trained workforce. So it's not just education, it's people in skilled trades who've already been working in a particular industry may invite other industries to co-locate in that same region to cluster because there's already a talented workforce in that area there. That's why Detroit, one of the reasons why Detroit became the head or the center of auto manufacturing, because they already had an established workforce working in metalworking in the city. So yeah, it's silly to try to compete. It's even sillier to try to compete over an Amazon distribution warehouse, because they locate those things at the exact right place to minimize their future costs. And so, and they need them where
A few
they
$1 million
are.
here or there isn't gonna matter, is it? Yeah.
Absolutely. And they need them right where they are in order to provide service to customers. So it's kind of like subsidizing a grocery store to locate near people that are going to buy groceries. It's completely unwarranted.
And we knew the governor was doing this for show, to make it seem like she was going big game hunting and like bring in the big fish one day. And so why? So I want to come back to training in a second, but first let me ask you this: why do policymakers like governors and like lawmakers love to give out these corporate subsidies?
So there's a couple reasons. The perhaps most generous reason is because others are doing it. That when you see other policymakers in Massachusetts and other places offering subsidies, it makes it feel like you have to join that competition just to signal to your voters that, look, I am doing what I can to make our community better. The non-generous answer to that, and I think both of them apply in different cases and to different proportions, is that the research finds politicians actually benefit from offering subsidies, even when they don't necessarily pull the firm in. That voters see them as doing something in the local economy.
Yeah, they get the headlines, right? It gets the headline.
And so best case scenario, they get the headlines and the ribbon cutting event. Worst case scenario, they just get the headlines that they're offering money. But either way, it's earned media for establishment politicians. It allows them to stay in office longer.
Just irresistible for them to spend our money to get a headline. And as you said, it disrupts the competitive balance in the state.
I've got an unpopular addition to that. Are you ready for some controversy?
Unpopular to me?
Unpopular perhaps to your audience.
All right, go ahead.
So the problem is not just politicians, it's actually voters as well. Because politicians tend to be followers. They tend to go out and figure out what do voters want, and then let me show them that I'm going to be the best one to give it to them. And so voters think that subsidies work, and so politicians turn to subsidies, or at least appearing to like, we're doing something, look, we're offering subsidies. But the thing is when voters realize that subsidies have trade-offs, that you get less tax relief in other areas, that you get less education, infrastructure, and safety service spending, all of a sudden they say, oh wait, maybe subsidies aren't as important after all. I'd rather have more tax relief or money going to education instead. And so if more people understood that subsidies don't work and that they shouldn't be offering them in the first place, then the politicians would probably change too.
You know, one of the interesting things we find about corporate welfare, it's not just conservatives that don't like them. I find that our most liberal friends also oppose them. Now, we don't want them because we want to cut the spending and keep taxes low. They don't want them because they think the money should be spent on more social justice type programs and things like of that nature. But what's odd to me is that despite this left-right opposition, I mean, you know, to anything, you know, anything from corporate subsidies to, I don't want to get into it, to stadium funds, for instance, to all kinds of things, massive opposition from the right and left, but yet the politicians do it anyway. And it's just infuriating. Anyway, so any thoughts on that?
Sure. So this gets to the more generous argument that I was making a moment ago, that it's what economists call the prisoner's dilemma problem. That it is the fact that if politician A offers subsidies, politician B in another state feels that they have to offer subsidies too. And so even though both of them aren't really a fan of offering subsidies in the first place because they can think of better things to do with their money, the fact that they know that the other one's probably going to offer subsidies makes them want to do it too. It's kind of like an arms race in subsidies. And so yeah, it's terrible. It's a self-replicating thing where you just keep spiraling down in this race to the bottom. And that's why you need some sort of specific means for everybody to credibly commit to ending it together.
You mentioned in one of your summary points that a survey found that 84% of mayors believe it's beneficial to offer subsidies. Now, let me have you comment on that, but I also want to weave that into a true story I heard. So my counterpart in Nevada, our think tank's part of a national network, told me, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago that they were, I think it was a constitutional amendment. It might have just been a piece of legislation. But anyway, it was something significant that banned the state from giving out any more corporate welfare. But you know what they did? The state gave it. The state, well, yes, the state gave a lot of money to the localities, and the localities gave out the corporate welfare. That was their way of getting around it. I mean, unbelievable. You can't, it's like you can't stop this thing.
It really does feel that way. It's a problem that states and cities have actually been dealing with for well over 150 years. My research by my colleague Matt Mitchell was back in March, found that there's actually 45 different states that already have clauses in their constitutions that would prohibit these kind of subsidies for private enterprise from public purpose or from public funds. But over the years, the legal understanding of what qualifies as a public purpose has gotten watered down.
Yeah.
Now a public purpose is anything the government does.
Yeah, kind of like eminent domain has evolved, yeah, that way too.
Exactly.
So let me go back to workforce training education. Now, we know Rhode Island is one of the worst educational systems in the country, or at least the city of Providence does, and Rhode Island does not rank well at all for the level of funding we have. But let me ask if you categorize this as corporate welfare. One of the biggest, in addition to the direct subsidies and incentives for setting up shop and hiring people, we give an awful lot of money out to corporations for training. Train your workforce. And these industries and these companies, and this is how we get so many industries and companies compromised in our state, as they start becoming reliant on these training dollars to have a more, better, more educated and trained workforce. So do you put these government funds for training purposes in the same category as the government subsidy that you're talking about in your paper?
So the answer would be, it depends. What it depends on is the training that the worker is receiving only useful for doing work for that particular firm? If it is, then it's a clear subsidy to the firm because it's reducing the cost of doing business, which is training their workers in order to do the things that make the firm productive. If they're industry-wide subsidies where they just kind of make you better at, say, coding in general, and all the companies in the IT space would benefit from that, that's less of a subsidy, but it's still a subsidy for the IT industry at, say, the expense of the barbershop industry, who would love to have more barbers out there that they could choose from, which would also depress the wages for barbers and would benefit the barber shops themselves.
Yeah, either way, it picks winners and loser companies and industries and creates an unequal free market playing field.
Absolutely. The only beneficial part of it from an econ point of view is that rather than giving a handout to the company for whatever they're going to use it for, potentially improving their profits, if nothing else, what you're doing is you're building human capital. You're building productivity in a person that is likely to lead to future productivity. It's a sustained kind of thing, kind of like planting an apple tree in your yard and then in the future you have a steady crop of apples. So
Very
like,
hard for us to argue against the concept of training, but
yeah.
I don't know, again, I don't know if you looked at it specifically, but are those training dollars worth the investment from a taxpayer point?
And that is the bigger question. And the
Right.
answer is, in general, the research finds that money spent by government on training is a massive waste of money.
Really? Is that in your report? I didn't read through every piece. Is that actually in your report? Is that just something you're aware of?
So I haven't tied into that. I've testified before Congress on the skills gap in the labor force and quoted some of the research in that testimony that I'm talking about. And my argument is that companies can take a tax exemption for the cost of doing business. If you buy a new machine, if you send someone out to a seminar to improve their ability to say work as an accountant, that sort of thing can be treated as a cost of doing business and deducted from your profits when you pay taxes. However, you can't train someone for a brand new position or train someone who has no training for a position. So you can't take that accountant and then train them up to be a human resources manager or something like that. Or you can't take some recent graduate from high school and say, like, you have a great work ethic and we love you. You don't have the skills needed to be a plumber. So you have to go to plumbing school first. We can't actually pay for your plumbing school as a cost of doing business. So the argument is just allow for that kind of training to be a business expense, which it is, and essentially doing that as a much better way of
From a
stimulating economic
tax
development.
deduction point of view rather than a handout.
Exactly. And at that point, it's available to everyone. It's a
Ah,
general law. And so it's no
yes.
longer a subsidy.
Oh, I like that. Thank you. I like that. Very good. All right. So would you agree, before we go to your innovative solution, last question, would you, again, just want to circle back to our premise. So would you agree then that paired with other items you could cut from social services, from whatever it is, that cutting corporate welfare in a state like ours that's facing massive budget deficits, where we've got to find a way to make revenues and expenses, balance out, that it is indeed, should be anyway, one of the lowest hanging fruit and no-brainers to cut?
It is the lowest hanging of the lowest
The
hanging.
lowest. Wow, of the
It
lowest.
is the
Wow.
lowest. It's a large amounts of money across the entire U.S. States and cities spend an estimated $95 billion every year on economic development subsidies. So even though it's not huge, you're not spending billions in Rhode Island, it still matters in terms of size of Rhode Island's budget. And if you don't, when you try to resolve that budget gap, if you're going to need every ounce of headroom that you can to avoid, because you make the first cuts into, say, social services and other programs, and you're just kind of trimming off what fat that is there. But the deeper the cut goes, the more it hurts. And so if we can take these low-hanging fruit like corporate welfare, economic development subsidies, then that means the cut into the state budget doesn't have to be as deep as it would otherwise be.
Okay. Let's go to your solution. Now we have, we're not actively so much right now, but for many years we've been advocating, similar to what I explained to you in Nevada, we've been advocating that we need to have a state constitutional convention. And one of the items we would push for to happen there is something that would ban these kinds of corporate handouts, this crony socialism that I like to call it. That's mine. I invented that one, by the way. You can use it. You can use it if you'd like, Doctor. So anyway,
Appreciate it.
so that would kind of put an end. Well, Nevada found a way around it, so maybe it's not such a good idea. But you've come up with an idea of an interstate compact. Now, interstate compacts, so why don't you just describe what they are generally first? We have all kinds of them, driver's licenses, all kinds of interstate compacts. But you think an interstate compact can help solve this crony socialism problem? Tell us what they are and why in this case.
Sure. So an interstate compact is part of the original U.S. Constitution. There's a compacts clause, just like there's a contracts clause and a commerce clause and that sort of thing. and they represent a continuation of the treaties that existed between the colonies
Hmm.
before the colonies were states.
Mhm.
And essentially what it is it's a way to achieve a multi-state policy solution to a problem that afflicts all of the states without resorting to Congress. And so it's a voluntary multilateral solution rather than an involuntary solution imposed by the federal government. And there's over 200 compacts addressing a really
200.
wide range, a wide array of things. Driver's licenses, universal recognition of driver's licenses, obviously, is one of them. Management of the Great Lakes watershed, of the Snake River watershed.
That's a regional compact.
Exactly. A lot of states are part of a nursing compact that says that they will recognize
Oh, yeah,
nursing
right,
licenses
right.
granted by other states. And so essentially they are ways for the states to cooperate often when the federal government is in gridlock or when they don't want the federal government to come
Hmm.
down and mandate something to them. So
Okay.
essentially in this case, what we would argue is that states come together and agree to not offer economic development subsidies as broadly understood as favoritism for one particular company that is not available for every company in the economy.
Would you
And
recommend they do that regionally? Like, let's be specific to Rhode Island. It would seem to make sense. I mean, it wouldn't matter if we had an economic compact with North Dakota and Mississippi, right? But if we had a compact with Massachusetts and Connecticut, and New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine, and then you know, so we're not competing against our neighbors. And as I think about it, it's almost like, hey, listen, I'm not going to compete against you, and if we don't compete against each other, we're going to save each other a hell of a lot of money.
absolutely. Yeah, so
That,
there's multiple ways that that a compact could come about. At the end of the day, you would want it to involve all 50 states, but it could come
Sure.
about as an initial compact just with the northeastern states, just with the midwestern states. It could involve specific kinds of subsidies to begin with. For example, stadium subsidies or film subsidies. Or you could just say, you know what, we're going to go for the whole kit and caboodle first, and we're just going to have a general compact for everybody, for everything. And the important thing, though, is there have been these kind of agreements in the past. New York City, New Jersey, and
on this
Connecticut.
specific issue, welfare, corporate welfare?
Yes, yes.
Huh.
So back in '91, New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut actually signed an agreement or a memo of understanding that they were going to stop trying to poach jobs from each other, because they were pretty infamous for putting up billboards in each other's jurisdictions saying, wouldn't this job be nicer in New Jersey or something like that, to try to get businesses to sway into other states. And actually, northern Indiana and northern Illinois around Chicago are doing this exact same sort of thing today as well.
All right, so why though, Doctor? Why? We just said earlier that politicians can't resist giving away this money. So why is a politician, whether it's a governor or a state law, why are they going to agree to an interstate compact that takes this little shiny thing away from them?
The answer is because a lot of politicians actually don't like giving these subsidies. They do it because they feel like they have to. That's part of the prisoner's dilemma I was talking about earlier. I'm worried that somebody else is going to do it, and if I don't do it, my voters will think that I'm not doing my job.
So if the other guy's not doing it, then there'll be less pressure on me to do it.
Exactly. And the benefit of Interstate Compact being part of the U.S. Constitution is that you can credibly commit to a given course of action and put in penalties into the compact for anybody who doesn't adhere to the compact that everyone has previously agreed to. And so unlike the Connecticut, New York City, New Jersey agreement from '91, which from my understanding fell apart in a matter of days because it didn't have any binding force on it. And there's a similar kind of agreement between Kansas and Missouri right now to end the border war that is along the Kansas City area, which is kind of like the biggest waste of money in the U.S. right now, because they've paid over $330 million within about the last 8 or 10 years to move jobs just about 5 miles across the state line.
So are there any actual compacts being proposed or being considered anywhere yet? I know your report just came out last week, so it's probably too early, but has this taken root anywhere?
Absolutely. So it's
Yeah,
actually
so
really fascinating. You mentioned that this is kind of a bipartisan issue. And the answer is that a lot of people have actually been working on this idea independently. And it seems that Amazon HQ2 was kind of the catalyst for this. There was the bridge to nowhere moment for subsidies, where bridge to nowhere moment was the bridge to nowhere moment for earmarks. And so there were people on the left, there were other groups of academics. The Mackinac Center published a report by Steve Slavinsky, Brian Schlomock, and Homan there at Mackinac that essentially a year and a half ago, that was an initial foray into this area.
Yeah, they've been fighting that for years. They've been, yeah.
Yeah, they do great work there.
They really do.
So,
all right, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so that's someone else from kind of like in the state think tank network that was looking at this. But then there are people working on this on the left side of the aisle as well, and they actually proposed interstate compact legislation in 5 states in 2019, and it has expanded to 14 states in 2020, and I was able to testify in about half a dozen of those states before the pandemic kind of wiped everything out for the moment.
All right, 2 quick questions. We're running along here, but that's all right. We don't have a real time, but I just don't want to keep it too long for our viewers. So would it also be fair to say, I'm just thinking this now, that from a corporate point of view, who has shareholders that they have to satisfy, just like a lawmaker, that they are, even if they know where they're going to go, they feel it's their duty to represent their shareholders. We're getting a little skin from somebody if we go there, just so they can make themselves look good to their constituents and stakeholders. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely fair to say. So Tesla just got awarded subsidies to build their new Cybertruck Gigafactory, as they call it, in Texas. Like, that news just literally came out earlier this week or last week. And they got millions of dollars for doing it. New York and Nevada are probably a little bit sick with that news because they paid billions for Tesla factories about 5 or 10 years ago. So the fact that Texas only gave Tesla millions seems like a positive deal. But the day after the agreement was signed, Tesla broke ground on the factory. And if you know anything about building permits or construction or anything like that.
Yeah, they were already well down the road. Yep.
So that means that the subsidy completely was not worthwhile.
Yeah, they were just trying to look good and all that. All right.
Hey, sure. I was just going to say there's a little bit darker undertone to this. Given that this is a dugout conversation,
okay,
how safe do we have to chat?
How safe is talk in a locker room or a dugout? Go right ahead.
All right. So I would argue that for some CEOs, getting subsidies is actually a bit of a pissing contest as well.
There's no spitting in baseball anymore, so there's probably no pissing anymore either. So anyway,
word came out.
I get it. Yeah, I get it.
That the reason for the Amazon HQ2 debacle, the 50 state competition for HQ2, was because Bezos was upset that Elon Musk got 1.3 billion in subsidies in Nevada for their gigafactory in Nevada, and he's like, we can get more than that.
So let's go rip off some taxpayers somewhere just so I can look good against you. What a disgrace. All right. Hey, last question on this before we wrap up. Just quickly, yes or no, have you and your team compiled state-specific data on numbers of subsidies, amounts of subsidies, and that kind of thing?
The best no is one answer, so no.
Okay. Because it's even harder for us to try to figure out. You got to pretty much go by news reports because a lot of it's off budget, and it's hard for us to track, and we've never really made it dedicated ever. I'm just curious if you had done our work for us. How come you didn't do our work for us anyway?
Yeah, the best estimate was a 2011 book by Kenneth Thomas, and that's where the 95 billion estimate comes from.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. Listen, as far as your Reds go, I think they have one of the best young pitching staffs in all the baseball. They're off to a slow start, like our Red Sox are up here. I don't know if your team. I kind of picked them as a sleeper to be in the World Series this year because they certainly got a few good hitters. I think they're 2-4 to start, but I know you've got some really good arms in your rotation. So I wish you and your Reds well. Of course, my Expos, who are now the Washington Nationals, are the reigning world champions. So take that.
I remember the screams and the cheers and the horns honking when they won last year. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't think everybody realizes the Washington Nationals are the Montreal Expos. We moved there to become the Nationals. Mike, it's been a pleasure. You're a great guy. It's good to talk to you. Maybe we'll have you back once we see what the corporate welfare budget looks like this year. Oh,
that'd be awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Good day.
Good day.
From the Dugout, this is Mike Stenhouse. We'll see you next game. Take care.